The Black Plague is in Idaho, you're probably going to get skin cancer, and we have 5 of the world's deadliest creatures right here. So today I'm going to teach you how to survive living in Idaho. Radon is probably something that never really crossed your mind when moving to a certain area comes up, but it probably should, because according to the Department of Health and Welfare, 2 out of every 5 homes in Idaho has high radon, which can be a cause for serious concern. Radon is a radioactive gas that can be found in homes that poses health risks. It can enter homes through cracks and openings, and long-term exposure to radon increases the risk of lung cancer, which makes it the second leading cause of lung cancer behind smoking. One of the reasons that it's getting more prevalent today is actually one of the same reasons that the air quality inside your home is getting lower and lower. It's your teens' bad hygiene. Just kidding. It's actually because homes are getting so well built and they're becoming so tight and sealed that air can't move in and out, so it kind of just sits in the home and becomes stagnant. Thus, if something like radon enters your home, it can have a hard time leaving. Now, this isn't an end of the world kind of thing, because radon tests can be performed in homes to see if there are higher than acceptable levels of radon, and if there is an issue, then mitigation systems can be put in the home and you won't have any issues after the fact. One of the things that we've just started to test for in wells here in Idaho over the last few years has been uranium, and shockingly, some of the wells actually have been testing positive or high in uranium. This is actually because we would dump uranium in wells to check for leaks in the lines because it would glow if it was leaking from somewhere. No, not actually. Uranium actually gets into wells because it comes from the decay of bedrock. So if there's some sort of bedrock in the area that's starting to decay and it contains uranium, it'll seep into the well through that way. And the amount of uranium in bedrock and well water is going to vary greatly from place to place around the entire state. And the only way to know if your well is contaminated with uranium is to have a test performed. If it tests high, this isn't an end of the world situation, because you can put water filters into place to mitigate the system, like a reverse osmosis system. Now, keep in mind, this only pertains to well water. So if you're on city, you're not going to have any issues with this. And if you'd like, you can actually go to your city water treatment website that you're getting your water from, and they'll have all the water test results. They keep testing their water over and over again, and they have all the results posted online, so you can check that out if that's something that concerns you. 5G towers are becoming quite the talking point lately, and it supposedly doesn't have any adverse side effects depending on who you ask. However, it is something that a lot of people are becoming more and more concerned about. I can't really speak a ton into this because it is such a new thing. However, a website that many of my clients have found to be very helpful is antennasearch.com. You can plug in an address of a property you're interested in, and it will tell you the distance to all the cell towers in the area. Going in line with cell towers, EMF from power lines can also be a concern to other people as well. We do have power lines on almost every single street in Boise. However, for the most part, they're the older low voltage power lines. But with the progress of technology, more of the high voltage power lines are coming along, and there isn't really a ton that we can do about that besides buy a property further away from them. One of the most frequently asked questions I get from people who are relocating to Idaho is going to be pertaining to air quality in a few different aspects: fire, smoke, pollen, allergens, and either smog or pollution. So I'll dive into these 3 independently, starting with wildfire. If you have spent any time in the western US, then you already know that wildfires are a pretty common thing in the summers. And just like with the weather, it's going to depend on the year. Some years we have a really bad fire season, and other years the sky is going to be crystal clear. The thing about Boise that makes it a bit prone to smoke issues is because we're kind of in a bowl, with Boise sitting in the middle and mountains all the way around it. So if smoke blows in from the north, it tends to get stuck here until we have a really good gust of wind that'll blow it out, or if we get rain comes in and washes it down. And the closer you are to the east side of the valley, i.e. the Boise and Eagle area, the more noticeable it'll be as it's closer to the mountains. Something that you might find interesting is that the vast majority of smoke that we get here in the Boise area isn't even from fires in Idaho. They're blowing from upwind in Washington and Oregon. To be precise, 145,220 acres burned in Washington during the 2023 fire season. An astounding 259,725 acres burned in Oregon in 2023. And drumroll for Idaho during the 2023 fire season. Keep in mind, those numbers that Oregon and Washington put up, they were in the 100,000s. Idaho is just below 87,000 acres. And one thing about this is that it doesn't even necessarily have to start in Idaho. If we have fires that start up in Washington or Oregon, embers can fly through the sky, miles and miles and miles. You'll be shocked how far embers can fly through the sky into Idaho and then start fires in Idaho. Several things go into the whole wildfire thing in the western US, but Idaho actually has a drier climate than Oregon and Washington, which makes it even more impressive that Idaho has a lower number of fires than Oregon and Washington. Hearing these numbers, people will probably start screaming, global warming is causing the wildfires, but it isn't exactly that. 3/4 of the wildfires that started in the 2023 season in Idaho were directly from people leaving their campfires unattended or just being ignorant when they go out and they have a campfire in the middle of the woods. And now here I am sounding like Smokey the Bear.
Only you can prevent communism.
Wait. Only you can prevent wildfires. I got kind of off track there, but in my opinion, the smoke really doesn't get bad here in the Boise area. We do see in the summer, typically at least once a year or maybe every other year, that football games or anything like that, football practices are going to get canceled during the summer because of smoke. But honestly, I think people are just getting soft. I mean, I have an inhaler for asthma and there hasn't been a single time that I've had to use my inhaler because the smoke was so bad. So just to give you kind of an idea on the extent of the smoke. What about pollen? Well, for everyone, it's going to be a bit different, but as a general rule of thumb, the allergy season is going to start around the beginning of March and then run until the first frost, which is usually around the October timeframe. In the springtime, it's going to be the tree allergies that are going to be the most prevalent with walnut, willow, and ash, but the real problematic ones are going to be cottonwood, juniper, and maple. During the summer, we deal with more of the grass and weed allergies. Bluegrass, ryegrass, timothy, Bermuda, orchard, and fescue are pretty common culprits for this. Then as we move into the fall season, this is really when the weed allergies are going to hit. Ragweed, tumbleweed, and pigweed, along with sagebrush, chenopod's, and amaranth. And since Idaho is a pretty diverse state, some allergens are going to be more prevalent than others depending what area you're in. For instance, in the Boise area, walnut, willow, ash, maple, and mulberry will hit hard in the spring. Bluegrass, Bermuda, timothy, and orchard grass will be prevalent during the summer, then ragweed, sagebrush, and arache in the fall. And if you didn't know, we do get snow in July, and that's because of the cottonwood trees. So that's one of my personal pet peeves, and especially if you guys are going to be buying homes, you really have to pay attention to your AC units on your houses because the AC units tend to suck up all the cotton from the cottonwood trees, and they can overheat, and it'll actually burn up your AC unit. So simple fix, you just got to wash it off and just maintain it and make sure that it's not getting caked with cottonwood seeds. Moving on to smog or pollution, Idaho really doesn't have any issues with this. In fact, it's not even something that we really talk about that much because it really just isn't prevalent for the area. The only time you might notice anything is in the winter if we have an inversion where the clouds kind of come in and they kind of get just stuck in here and they trap all the stagnant air underneath, and it'll kind of hang around there. You might notice some air quality starting to get somewhat worse, but this is nothing close to like San Francisco smog. Elevation is going to be a huge one if you're relocating from the West Coast to Idaho for a couple different reasons that I don't think many people take into account, but there are huge reasons, and that's going to be the sun and oxygen. And since most of you that are watching this video are probably living at or around sea level, this really is going to apply to you, so you're going to want to pay attention to this. Going back to middle school science class, we all know that the air isn't totally made up of oxygen. It only makes up about 21% of the total atmosphere in the air that we breathe in. At sea level, you're getting 100% of the oxygen in the atmosphere per breath. As you increase your elevation, the air starts to get thinner and thinner and thinner. That's why people that climb Mount Everest, for instance, carry oxygen tanks with them, because as they get higher and higher in elevation, the air gets so thin, there's not enough oxygen in the air for them to breathe on their own accord. Well, Boise sits at about 2,500 feet in elevation from sea level, and if you aren't accustomed to the air density here, then you're probably going to find yourself running out of breath more than usual. And this is simply because the air is less dense here. Per breath, you're getting about 10% less oxygen at Boise than you are at sea level. So by contrast, you'll have to breathe about 10% more to get the same amount of oxygen that you were getting at sea level. Now, this isn't something that's going to plague you forever, and a lot of you might not even notice it. However, this is something to take into account. Definitely wouldn't recommend stepping off of the plane and going and running a marathon. You might want to give your body a little bit of time to acclimate to the different air density. Idaho is among the top 10 states in the US that have a high rate of skin cancer, and this is mainly due to UV exposure. One of the potential reasons for this, again, again around here is because of the elevation. As UV light comes through our atmosphere, the further and further down it goes, it decreases more and more and more. Essentially, our atmosphere acts like a filter for the sunlight. So it's least potent around sea level, and reverse that, the higher in elevation you go, the more potent it is going to be. Statistically, UV exposure can increase by as much as 10% for every 1,000 feet above sea level you go. So with Boise being at 2,500 feet elevation, the sun exposure can be as much as 25% more intense in Boise than if you're on the beach in San Francisco. And that's quite a bit. So if you're prone to burning like I am, then it's going to happen even faster here than if you're at the sea. Something else to take into consideration with this, if you're watching this video, you probably like to get outdoors and enjoy hiking in nature. And we've got some pretty high mountains here in Idaho, so it's not uncommon for you to find yourself above 5,000 feet elevation or even higher. This year when I was hunting, I was over 7,000 feet elevation. So thinking back to our conversion, at 5,000 feet in elevation, the UV sun exposure can be as much as 50% more intense at 5,000 feet elevation than at sea level. Moral of the story, you really have to pay attention to sun exposure in Idaho, whether you're wearing appropriate clothing or sunscreen. I bet I can make everybody that grew up prior to 2000 connect over a traumatic experience with 2 words: Old Yeller. Now that I made your eyes water a little bit, this does bring me to the next thing that you need to watch out for in Idaho, and that's going to be rabies. Now, it's not like we have a bunch of rabid wolves running around, although I can't speak for the future. However, it is something to be cautious of here in Idaho, mainly among wildlife, with the most common culprit of this being bats, but occasionally raccoons. We typically have at least one occurrence where somebody gets bit by a bat every single year in Idaho that is infected with rabies. Did you know that 5 of the world's deadliest insects live right here in Idaho? And they're all deadly for their own different reasons. The first one is going to be the black widow spider. They are 100% native to Idaho, and just a little bit of context, because I just learned this myself. I didn't even realize. I mean, it's a tiny little bug. How deadly could it be? Well, about 15 times more poisonous than a rattlesnake. So with that being said, it might be a good idea to get on a good pest control plan when you move to Idaho. But on a more personal note, it's not that often that you're going to find black widows here in Idaho, because they really don't like to hang around people in houses and stuff like that. They're really docile. They like to hang out in dark, cool, quiet places. So like if you're going under your house or something like that, that's where they're going to be. Might make you want to reconsider crawling under your deck in your backyard. The second deadly insect that we have here in Idaho is going to be bees and wasps. And this is probably no surprise to anyone, because usually when people have any issues with it is because they have an allergic reaction to the bee or the wasp sting. I personally haven't had any issues with bees in Idaho, but wasps are definitely something that you're probably going to come across pretty frequently in the summertime. I come across them at my place all the time. I get stung maybe once or twice a year, but there's not really anything that like pest control people can do, because you kind of just got to be proactive with it. If you see them starting to build a nest, you just got to go knock it down with either a broom. Always keep a can of wasp spray at your property, because you can get them from a good distance. You just really have to stay on top of things, and if they start building a nest, then take care of that. The next deadly insect is mosquitoes. Nobody likes them, and we are all glad when they disappear in the wintertime. Thankfully, we don't have a ton of issues with mosquitoes here in Idaho, simply due to the dry climate, so you're not going to have to build yourself a screened-in patio like if you were living in Florida. Did you know that mosquitoes are the #1 killer in the world, which seems pretty crazy to me because they're so small? One particular disease that is associated with mosquitoes here in Idaho is going to be West Nile virus, and we just had our first human case of West Nile virus contracted in Idaho in August of 2023. So just like anywhere else, bug repellent and wearing appropriate clothing when you're outdoors or anywhere where you could possibly get a mosquito bite is going to be your best friend. But like I said earlier, Idaho is high desert. It's a dry climate. We really don't have any issues with mosquitoes unless you live somewhere that's super close to water. Like maybe you're going to get a house that's next to a creek, or you're next to the Boise River, or some sort of stagnant water that's kind of standing. That's typically where you're going to see areas that are high in mosquitoes. I, for instance, can sit on my back patio here in North Nampa and never get a mosquito bite. But if I go walk the Boise Greenbelt, or if I'm fly fishing in the Boise River, I am definitely going to get eaten alive by mosquitoes. If you've lived in the eastern US or in the Pacific Northwest, then ticks are probably an everyday occurrence to you. However, they are among the top 5 deadliest insects in the world, just like mosquitoes, for the same reason, and that is going to be transmitting diseases. Fortunately, we don't have Lyme disease documented here in Idaho. However, we do occasionally get cases of Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Just like with mosquitoes, they're not really all over the entire state. So if you're just in your backyard or in residential areas, you're probably not going to have any issues with ticks. But if you decide to go be Daniel Boone and go run through the grass and the brush, you're probably going to pick up a couple ticks. I've lived in Idaho my whole life. I'm an avid outdoorsman and I spend a ton of time in the woods, and I have yet to ever have a tick burrow into me. I've caught them climbing up my clothing, but never had a tick in me. When I mention Black Death, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Probably the Black Plague that spread throughout Europe during the 1300s and wiped out over 50% of the population. That's a thing of the past, right? Right? Well, not exactly. With just a quick Google search, you can see that we actually have the bubonic plague here in Idaho. But since 1940, there have only been 8 recorded cases, with the most recent being in 2018. And the culprit of all this is the fleas. Just like with the Black Plague, the fleas hitched rides on rats, and that's how they got everywhere. Now, rats are very rare in Idaho. However, we have a lot of these little suckers right here, ground squirrels, also known as whistle pigs, and they are the common culprits carrying the fleas that have these problems. If you found this video helpful, check out all the other videos on my channels like these right here. And until next time, I'm Isaac Crace with Top Idaho Real Estate, your 3rd generation Idaho Realtor.